McDonald's is a place to rock. It is a restaurant where they buy food to eat. It is a good place to listen to the music. People flock here to get down to the rock music. Rock and roll McDonald's. Rock and roll McDonald's. Rock and roll McDonald's. Rock and roll McDonald's. McDonald's will make you fat.
I'll be real with you, I'm not even sure how to start this video off. Today's subject is a little different than our usual ones, but I think this guy is far more significant than some of the weirdos we've looked at before. You see, the man we'll be going over has left a positive mark on a lot of people. He was and still very much is an important part in the long history of music. This is someone who was dealt an incredibly unfortunate hand in life. Someone who was repeatedly knocked down and pushed back, but always got back up despite the effort of other people. This is the story of Wesley Willis, based on accounts from his family, his many friends, his astute colleagues, and his loyal fans. And before we get into this, I want to preface that I've read through many articles on this and watched several documentaries. There are a few things that may be inaccurate as they are based on the recollection from Wesley himself. And as you'll soon learn, there's a reason outside of his control as to why he may have been somewhat of an unreliable narrator. The journey began on May 31st, 1963. Wesley Lawrence Willis was born to Walter and Annie Willis. Wesley was one of 10 children. He and his siblings were very close, while their relationship with their parents was shaky to say the least. Wesley stated that his relationship with his mother was mostly positive, stating in the documentary The Daddy of Rock and Roll that she was always nice to him and cared about him. However, the stories about his father weren't exactly up to snuff. His parents unfortunately were afflicted by drug addiction. Due to the neglectful nature of his parents, thanks to their substance abuse and the lack of care, Wes and his siblings were removed from the household so they can be entered into the foster care system. Wesley and his siblings were split up, with a handful going into foster care while the others were sent back into the family. Wes stayed with his aunt in Phoenix, Illinois, where he was treated far better than he was in his first home. He formed a very special bond with his aunt, seeing her as his guardian angel during this period. After the familial separation, Annie wised up and separated from Walter. She later met a man named Roger Lee Carpenter. Unfortunately, Annie made a poor decision with Roger, as he was incredibly abusive. In 1976, when Wesley was about 13 years old, he'd travel around the city of Chicago with some art supplies he had gathered in a foldable chair. This city was where he was born, and he loved it. He would find prime spots for him to do something fun and engaging. His favorite pastime was drawing compositions of his surroundings. He mainly went to the nicer parts of town, as he was enamored by the bustling streets and the stacked towers. Using his basic office-grade pens and colored markers, he constructed caricatures of the metropolis that surrounded him. When he was in need of money, he could always sell one of his art pieces to strangers as he was an impeccable salesman. Disregarding the low price of his art, which was usually around $20 to $40, the real value of his work could be found in his enthusiasm alone. He also stated that he loved doing this because it gave him a reason to leave the negativity of his home life behind and he could meet new and interesting people. Wesley had a pretty good memory. Many of the numbers on the side of the public transport or on the license plates in the vehicles in his pictures were pulled from his memory. Hell, a vast majority of the finer details in his work were sourced from his memory alone. Not many people have that ability. According to Paul Young, a friend of Wes, the two crossed paths in 1981 thanks to Wesley's artwork. Paul was teaching freshman courses for architectural drawing. As we just went over, Wes was absolutely into architecture and skyscrapers and what have you, but he really didn't have the funds to attend such a class. Paul pulled some strings so that way Wes could visit and participate in the class to an extent. However, this only happened periodically. Wes showed a good understanding for the development process and actually wanted to become an architect. This class was one of the reasons why Wesley preferred to do his line work with blue ink ballpoint pens, as architects make blueprints and he needed his buildings to have blue lines. In September of 1983, the Chicago Defender published a photo of Wesley, showing him standing on an overpass, drawing a portrait of the city. This helped raise his notoriety a few pegs within Chicago's art scene. He frequented a store called Genesis, where he'd buy his art supplies and occasionally hang out to draw. This was another great avenue for him to meet new people and make friends, especially those who were into art and related stuff like he was. When he was drawing, he'd do it both indoors and outdoors, with the former being localized on the sidewalk in front of the shop. This place would be one of the biggest influences on his life, as he would make many lifelong friendships here. When Wes was in his 20s, he and his siblings moved back into his childhood home, with his mother and her new man. Wesley was always a little different, which caused tension between him and Roger. He didn't approve of how Roger was to Annie, as he was rightfully protective of his mother. Roger didn't respond well to this and made Wesley and his brothers watch him receive oral stimulation from their mother. They would also have to witness and partake in beatings and verbal attacks, alongside watching Annie and Roger abuse drugs. This all came to head on October 15, 1989. Wesley had been saving a bit of money to move out from under the tyranny of Roger. Obviously, this guy had a lot of power over Wesley's life at this point. Due to the rising instability of the household, yet another argument had broken loose and things didn't go exactly as planned, as Roger had learned about Wes's intentions and proceeded to put a gun to Wesley's temple and subsequently robbed him of $600. This event was extremely traumatizing to Wes and would stick with him for the rest of his life. Unfortunately, after this terrible meltdown, Wesley said that he started hearing voices. Once Roger caught wind of Wesley's affliction and started noticing signs that he was actually very mentally ill, Roger kicked him out. How fucking understanding, right? In his song Chronic Schizophrenia, Wesley stated, quote, "My mind plays tricks on me every time I say something. It brings evil voices out of my head and talks to me vulgar, then suddenly I started raving." Clearly sounds like a hellish experience, doesn't it? After dealing with the many trials and tribulations of living on different people's couches and bunkering down in different homes, one of the employees at Genesis and a close friend of Wesley's, Carla Winterbottom, offered to let Wesley stay with her for a bit. Little did she know that he'd be there for a touch longer than that, but she would form one of the most significant bonds with the person she'd ever have. Wesley cared a lot about Carla because she cared a great deal about him. She'd remind him to take care of himself, she'd help him get the assistance he needed from medical professionals and whatever else. They lived almost like siblings, and Wesley appreciated her more than he could ever possibly articulate. Not to suggest that he didn't try to tell her how he felt, of course. Wesley's behavior became much more erratic due to his untreated mental illness. He would refer to the voices in his head as demons, and these said demons had a proclivity to torture him with hateful words. His response to their argument was not exactly pleasant, as Wes would retaliate by ranting and raving, cursing at the demons that were causing him so much grief. There were also times where he would hit himself in the head to get back at the demons, but these were significantly less common than the usual cursing. Unfortunately, his demons had a tendency to be the most active when he was out and about in Chicago, especially on public transport. Needless to say, his outbursts led to him getting removed from many different places. Since Wesley didn't have a car, he would have to rely on his friends to give him rides, or he would have to take a trip on public transportation. His favorite was the Pace bus line, which normally ran through the suburbs, which he found to be the most entertaining and relaxing ride. He experienced immense joy whenever he was able to escape his usual environment. However, like stated before, his demons would often start acting up whenever he was out on the town, which led to him getting kicked off the bus. These negative events resulted in what he would call hell rides. Hell rides were initially just unpleasant experiences on the bus, but they also branched out into his normal day-to-day schedule. So anytime he was feeling unwell or stressed or having a manic episode, he was experiencing one of his hell rides. However, anytime he was doing good and things were on the up and up, he was experiencing a joyride. Additionally, while this may not be too important, he referred to hell rides as riding the hell bus or referred to the buses as hell buses. Try saying that 10 times fast. According to Wesley, a man named John Dillard attacked him on the 31st of August 1991 at 10 o'clock at night. Wesley had just gotten off the bus and was busy cursing his demons in his head. Mr. Dillard mistook the ranting and raving as an insult and proceeded to whip out a box cutter, chasing after Wesley once they were both off the bus. Despite Wesley's efforts, John was able to slash him in both the face and the back. Willis did give conflicting recollections of the story, as at one point he claimed that it was a robbery rather than a violent misconception. But either way, it did not turn out good for him.
John Dillard was an asshole. He was a real stupid jerk. He attacked me with a box cutter as I exited the 4 County Stroll bus. What a stupid ass motherfucker.
This evil attack did not stop Wesley from doing what he loved. He went right back to moseying around the city and drawing his favorite places regardless of his injuries the very next day. According to the documentary Wesley Willis as himself, John Dillard was Wesley's first song. Conversely, Willis stated in the very same documentary that the first 2 songs he wrote were Jesus is the Answer and I'm Sorry That I Got Fat, So Take That As You Will. In the same year, Wesley discovered that he had a hidden talent regarding a certain type of media. You see, Wesley was usually listening to music when he was strolling the streets, typically jamming out to some good old-fashioned rock and roll. When he started hearing voices, he figured out that music helped ward them off a bit, which added that much more importance to his tunes. However, anybody can listen to music, but those who are truly capable and creative actually make it. Wesley was going to be one of those people. According to Bob Fredericks, one of Wes's many friends, he purchased a little Sony Walkman recorder and brought it to work with him at Genesis. Wesley saw this and was immediately enamored. He asked Bob if he could borrow it, which Bob agreed to, and Wes began going off on his usual tangents, but with a rhythm. This is typically regarded as the beginning of Wesley's musical endeavors. Willis was now aware of just how much fun he had coming up with lyrics and expressing his emotions. This was an opportunity unlike anything anybody ever could have predicted. Wesley had a good friend named Dale Miners, who had previously played guitar in Billy Corgan's old band The Marked. Dale had a little musical group at the time and often would let Wesley hang out with them while they practiced. But there was one little issue. Wesley had some ideas and he wasn't part of the band. These guys were deep into working on a project and Wesley saw an opportunity to make some music with his boys. So Wesley kept asking to jam out with with them. Dale initially declined Wes's request because he wanted to work on stuff specifically for the group. However, over time, he and his bandmates warmed up to the idea of rocking out with Mr. Willis. Once they gave the microphone to Wesley and he started doing his thing, they realized that he had a lot of potential due to the colorful nature of his lyrics. They knew that Wesley was destined for something great, even if his lyrics were questionable. This led to them forming a new group under the name the Wesley Willis Experience, which was such a fitting title given the topics of their work. He'd sing about the man who attacked him, or about Jesus, or Casper the homosexual friendly ghost. Think I'm joking? Look at the track list for their studio album, Spooky Disharmonious Conflict Hellride. See, I wasn't joking. The genre of music was punk rock, however Wesley preferred to think of it as poetry rock. His songs often featured some pretty vulgar lyrics, mostly involving people he didn't like or animals' assholes. The vulgarity was intended to offend or gross out his demons so they would leave him alone. He was able to make the voices quiet down for a bit, and we got some beautiful tracks about sucking various different animals' sphincters. The group went on tour and played at plenty of clubs and small theaters, entertaining the masses with Wesley's sultry tones and gripping lyrical subject matter, and Wes loved every bit of it. He'd often practice his stage presence while jamming out with the group, as he wanted to make sure everybody knew that he was a rock star, because he absolutely was. He was on the best kind of joyride when the bar crowd was feeling his music, even if he was singing about Jesus or how he got fat. It was an incredible confidence booster for him, and it was a total far cry from how he was treated at other points in his life. But this group wouldn't stick together forever, as by 1996, the group disbanded. Shortly before everybody decided to depart, members of the troupe were encouraging Wesley to stop taking his medication because it was too difficult to keep him on the medicine that he needed. By the time the congregation was calling it quits, Wesley had been getting violent and much more intense. He had been breaking pool cues and swinging microphone stands at people, breaking bottles against walls, you know, the kind of stuff that nobody should be doing. But really, what were they expecting? They thought taking an ill man off his psych meds would help him? Wesley stated in interviews that his members were treating him, quote, like a dumb fuck, and it's quite obvious to see that they were. Despite the breakup of a truly groundbreaking group, Wesley was not done with his involvement in the music business. He went out on his own, making his own music and still writing his own lyrics, bringing it all to life with his vibrant vocabulary. Even if you subtract the profanity from his spoken word, you'd find that he was actually very eloquent underneath his ailments. He used large words like defenestration, which is likely something you wouldn't expect him to say. Hell, I didn't even know what the word was when I heard him say it. I know it's just a word, but I think it's always commendable when somebody understands their language, you know? With his keyboard and his silver tongue, Wesley went out on his own and reached new heights that he never could have predicted. His music was much more simplistic since it was just him, so he had to cut some corners. A majority of his tracks used the same instrumental but had varying tempos so he could repurpose them however he needed. He stated his keyboard had 61 keys, but he only needed to use 14 of them. When asked about this, he stated that it's just the way he rocks. It's how he made his songs his own way, and it worked. In order to write his lyrics, he'd trek across town and hit up his favorite brainstorming establishment, Kinko's. He'd use one of the supplied computers, open up a word processor, and began transcribing his thoughts and emotions. The people around him were at least somewhat familiar with his musical prowess, often remarking how cool it was that he was creating art in their store. He certainly loved the attention, plus it didn't hurt to have somebody on standby in case the computer wasn't cooperating with him. Something kind of funny about his songs was a little quirk he had for the endings. He'd always close out by saying rock over London, rock on Chicago, and follow that with a company or brand name along with their slogan. For example, at the end of his certified hottest banger rock and roll McDonald's, he said Wheaties, breakfast of champions, which had nothing to do with the rest of the song, but something about it just had a little punch, a little oomph. Unexpected but then predictable, but consistently unintentionally funny. His love for music was also closely tied to his love for compiling statistical information. For example, another one of his quirks was how he knew the exact amount of days certain people will be serving in prison. During conversation, there was always a chance that he'd bring up that somebody was sent to jail for 100 years, which was about 56,528 days, with the 28 being to spare. He made his own covers using the artistic abilities he had honed for years prior for his skyscraper drawings, superimposing himself on stage or playing music or just a lot of skyscrapers because he still loved the big city and his music was nothing but love. Speaking of his love, the way he'd share it with his fans was quite unique. I'm sure by now you've noticed a dark spot on his forehead. Most people just assume it's a birthmark or in some cases a poorly placed tattoo, but it's actually just a darkened callus on his forehead due to him greeting his fans with a loving headbutt. He didn't just run up and slam his forehead into theirs, but rather he would get close to them and consensually bonk his head against theirs. Hard, mind you, but not malicious. When asked about this behavior, he said he liked it because he's crazy and a rock star, but this behavior only started after his mental diagnosis. Prior to the bumping, he would lock eyes with his friends and say something like, "Keep those eyes staring at me." Another way he'd show affection was by having people repeat some of the noises he'd make. For example, he'd have them say rah or row, almost like playful meowing. If we paired this with the behavior he had with the headbutting, it almost seems like he's been imitating behaviors from cats, but that's more of just me drawing baseless conclusions. Regardless, Wes was incredibly friendly to his fans and had no issues slinging CDs for some good old-fashioned paper. He would enter a place knowing nobody and leave shaking hands and making lifelong friends. His ability to network while showing compassion for his fellow man helped him make lots of money. A majority of the time he was carrying at least a few $1,000s on him, just because he'd recently made so much from in-person artwork and CD sales. This was a wonderful thing for him because he really did seem to resent having grown up in poverty. He achieved something that was initially very unrealistic for someone in his situation, but he just kept excelling despite the efforts of his demons. Before we move on, I want to give you guys a quick list of some of the names of his songs in order to properly illustrate the variety of his discography. Rock and Roll McDonald's.
Rock and roll McDonald's. Rock and roll McDonald's.
Chronic Schizophrenia.
Chronic schizophrenia. Chronic schizophrenia.
Kris Kringle Was a Car Thief.
Kris Kringle was a car thief.
I'm Sorry That I Got Fat.
I'm sorry that I got fat. I'm sorry that I got fat. I'm sorry that I got fat. I was slimmed down.
I Whooped Batman's Ass.
I whooped Batman's ass. I whooped Batman's ass.
I Whipped Spider-Man's Ass.
I was Spider-Man's ass. I was Spider-Man's ass.
Suck a Cheetah's Dick.
Suck a polar bear's funky ass. Suck a racehorse's cop with Heinz tomato ketchup. Suck a donkey's shitty ass. Suck a male candlestick of hoisin sauce. Suck a cheetah's dick.
Suck a Caribou's Ass.
Suck a caribou's ass. Suck a caribou's ass. Suck a caribou's ass.
Nobody will ever be able to come close to the flair of this writing. Everything else is just imitation. Wesley was, by all means, the real deal. But like I mentioned before, his music's colorful themes were very much due to his mental illness. He did have medication for his affliction, however the side effects were pretty severe and thus made taking his meds much harder for him. Some of the effects were tics, swelling of the tongue, laborious breathing, excessive weight gain, and slurred speech. Wes was insecure about his need for medication, but was even more embarrassed to not have it. As long as his schedule was regular and he wasn't on tour, he was actually pretty good about taking his pills. Unfortunately, due to the hustle and bustle of his blossoming career, Wes did forget to take his medication from time to time when he was on the road. He always needed somebody to kind of mother him, you know, just to remind him to keep clean, take care of himself, eat right, stay on top of his medication, etc., etc. This is the unfortunate reality for somebody like him who was involved in this business. Wesley was diagnosed with myelogenous leukemia at the end of 2002. He was treating it with Gleevec, a medication that is able to block certain proteins that are beneficial to the cancer, which can slow down the growth of the cancer cells or might just kill them entirely. This medication was working well for Wesley and he was determined to kick cancer's ass, because he was a hard-headed rock star, and when he rocked he rolled, and when he rolled he rocked. But like we just went over, he had some difficulties regarding his medical schedule. His time away from home also made it significantly harder for him to pick up his prescription. This unfortunately led to Wesley's cancer becoming much more aggressive. Wesley was understandably slowing down, experiencing immense fatigue and night sweats alongside shortness of breath.
I like the way she rock.
Right.
I like the way she roll.
Right. When you
I
saw
like the way she whip her horses behind her belt.
right.
And I like the way she rock it all the time.
Wesley was placed in hospice once he was no longer able to properly take care of himself, but his friends and family made an incredible effort to make sure his room was truly his so he could be as comfortable as he deserved. Some of his furnishings included his keyboard, his art supplies, and plenty of clocks to hang on the walls. He never stopped creating unique artwork, nor did he stop writing lyrics when he could. Nothing could ever break him. On August 21, 2003, in Skokie, Illinois, Wesley passed due to his lengthy battle with leukemia. This news hit his friends, his family, and of course his fans very, very hard. But thankfully, he has never been forgotten and never will be. He left behind an incredible legacy, a staggering discography, accompanied by a plethora of handmade representations of his favorite city in the world. His interactions with his fans have left a mark that will definitely be felt for generations through his music, and even though his songs were filled with nonsensical vulgarity and ideas, most of which people found immensely humorous, he was able to make people smile. It all comes back to love with Wesley. Rock over London, rock on Chicago. But unfortunately, I'm afraid that's the end of today's video. If you like what I do, leave a comment, rate, and subscribe. If you want to support me in a more personal way, you can check out the Patreon link and the Teespring link in the description. I've got more content coming down the pipeline. But until then, I'll see you degenerates next time.